Okay, Boker Tov. This year, as all our shiurim this year are dedicated in memory of Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman, Elisheva Frist, Zichronah Livracha, and the learning should also be a schut that Kadosh Baruch Hu should allow all of our chatufim to come home safely, and all our chayalim to come home safely, and we should end this properly for the L'tovat Am Yisrael, whatever that's supposed to mean. L'tovat Am Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu has an idea of what L'tovat Am Yisrael is all about. The page I just handed out now, there might still be some, it carries a title, Congress HaOlami 18th of Madei Yadut, the 18th World Congress of Jewish Studies, which was conducted here in Yerushalayim in the summer of 2022, where I presented this particular topic, but it has the sources that I want for the coming shiurim, so you'll have to excuse me with the topic. Habrachot v'atfilot b'mishneh Torah leharambam b'nusach Ashkenaz. Very strange title. Brachot and tfilot in the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam that appear in Nusach Ashkenaz. Now, the Rambam was a Class A Sfaradi, a thoroughbred Sfaradi. While there are some Ashkenaz Sfaradi greats who are somewhat of a hybrid, sometimes because of relocation and sometimes because who their teachers were, the Rambam was not. I'll just give you two examples. One was the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, clearly a Sephardic giant, no doubt, Barcelona, 13th century, except that some of his teachers were from the Balei HaTosfot, were those who migrated from France. So he has Ashkenazi training as well. So Ramban is categorically a hybrid. But even more so, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, known as the Rosh. The Rosh was born in Ashkenaz and migrates to Spain and becomes a Rav in Toledo in the 14th century already, late 13th century, beginning of 14th century. He clearly writes his Perush on the Gemara in the style of the Tosfot. So you can see that he is in line with that kind of tradition. Yet when he writes his Shelot Uchuvot, his halachic responsum, when he's a Rav in Toledo in Spain, it has the style of the Sephardi Rabbanim. So he was able to adapt to be a type of Sephardi posek, while on the other hand, he was a parshan, one who exposited to explain the Gemara in the spirit of the Tosfot from Ashkenaz. So this is something that we have. I mean, there are many of you who may remember from Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, the Rabbi Zvulun Lieberman, Zichronah Livracha, who was rabbi of the Syrian community. You know, how did that happen? And how did Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, grandson of Rabbi Ahron Soloveitchik, become the rabbi of the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in New York City? So these things happen. Or for that matter, the Chacham Tzvi. The Chacham Tzvi was the father of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the great Rav from Germany 300 years ago. His father got a position in Amsterdam, and he was a Rav over a community of Spaniards who fled from the expulsion, and they were now in Amsterdam, a very large Jewish community, Sephardic Jewish community, and he becomes the Rav, and that's why he's named Chacham Tzvi. Chacham is what they gave to the Rabbanim of the Sephardim, and he's thoroughbred Ashkenazi, except that he's rabbinating in a Sephardi community. So he's the Chacham Tzvi. But so Rabbi Yaakov Emden, his son, is known as Rabbi Yaakov ben Tzvi. So the Tzvi is the Chacham Tzvi, and the Rabbi Yaakov Emden was more popularly known by his abbreviations, Yud Ayin Bet Tzaddik, Yaakov ben Tzvi, the Yavitz, and that generated the name Javits, like in Jake Javits, the great senator from New York State, who was, and the Javits Center in his memory in Manhattan, who was a great grandson of the Rabbi Yaakov Emden and the Chacham Tzvi. Not bad. That's pretty good yichus. And he knew about it. He knew about that, but he wasn't a Belzer Chosed, Jake Javits. But he was a friend of the Jews, friend of Israel, for sure. Okay, so At this conference I spoke at, and we'll see what it means, Mishnah Torah coming in Nusach Ashkenaz. But let's look at the first two sources, which I already brought to your attention the last 2 weeks, and that has to do, and this will kick us off, where the Rambam makes a comment in the Hilchot Kriyat Shema Klosho davar. Here is a general principle. Anybody who makes an error in the coined phrase that Chachamim use to write, to author, to the brachot and the tefillot, hareze to'eh, he is in error. V'chozer u'muvarech matbeah. He has to repeat the bracha. I believe I mentioned it last week or the week before that the Rambam restates this later down the road in Hilchot Brachot, where he modifies. He says, yeah, you are in error, but you fulfilled your obligation anyway, as long as, and that's the source number 2, Hilchot Brachot, Perek Aleph, Per Halacha Vav, Chol Brachot Kulan Ne'emarin B'chol Lashon. A bracha can be said in any language. So can you imagine, you mentioned about the way a person says Lashon Kodesh. You can even say the bracha or tefillah in the vernacular, in a different language, by the way, provided that you understand the language. Because if you don't understand the Chinese and you're reading the bracha in Chinese, then there's no fulfillment of the bracha. But if Chinese is your spoken language and you daven in Chinese, fine. Sometimes when I listen to Balei Tefillah daven, it sounds like Chinese, the way they daven. But kol brachot kulan ne'emarin b'chol lashon, in any language. V'hu sheyomar ke'ein shetiknu chachamim. The translation should follow the way the Chazal instituted the bracha. It should have the component parts. Ve'im shina et matbeah. But if he davened in Hebrew, but he somehow did not really say it in accordance with the precise coined language, Ho'il, provided, v'izkir askara u'malchut, he mentions God's name, and he mentions the fact that God is the king of the universe, somehow. The inyana bracha, and the theme of the bracha is there, afilu b'lashon chol, even in a foreign language, yatsa, he fulfilled his obligation. Now that's a far cry from what he said earlier in source number 1, that if you don't say it precisely the way it was authored by Chazal, you are in error and you have to repeat the Shmoneh Esrei, that bracha, whatever it might be. And I believe I mentioned that the Vilna Gaon believed that this was a changed position in the Rambam, and I have an idea that the Rambam changed his position based on a view in the Yerushalmi. That's a story I'm not going to repeat. But this gives us a very, very important kickoff, that the language has to be correct. Now, what happened with time, because of the expulsion of Jews from Eretz Yisrael, and you should know that the big expulsion did not happen at the time of the second destruction, but happened at the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolution, which was in 135, 136 of the Common Era, about 65 years after the Churban. That's when the expulsion really took place, which means after the Churban, in the year 70, most of the Jews who were here remained here. Of course, we mentioned time immemorial many times that most of the Jews weren't even here in the first place for Bayit Sheni. They were in Bavel, and there was already a Jewish community in Egypt, and there was a budding Jewish community developing in Italy, which becomes the embryonic community of Ashkenaz. Ultimately, Italian Jews moved more north, and they moved to Germany, France, Germany, and so on. That becomes Ashkenaz. But you already have, from the days of Hashmonaim, a very, very small Jewish community developing in Italy. But you have a significant Jewish community in Egypt, and the majority of Jews are in what modern-day Iraq, Bavel, Babylonian Jewish community. But you had the Eretz Yisrael, yeah. So you have to check it out with the Gabaim. You're absolutely right. The pace of the Tefillah should be in accordance with the majority of the people davening there. You cannot hold back the community because one person is having difficulty. That you can't do, because that would be TORAH HaTzibur, that you're causing undue burden to the community. But I've been in situations already where the Chazan was so fast that he doesn't have his crowd with him when you're supposed to have a minyan with him, and that's bad. And that's very, very bad. So, okay, Lein Shabbat is less problematic, because you don't need a minyan. You don't need a minyan for Lein Shabbat. Lein Shabbat has a nickname. It's called Tfilat HaDerech, because people have one foot out the shul. So I'm saying Leinu is less problematic. More problematic is after Baruch Hu, where the Chazan just speeds along, and he's up to Et Shem and Kadosh Kadosh and Baruch Hu Hashem Kamo. He doesn't have a minyan with him. You have to have a minyan for Kadosh Kadosh Kadosh. I mean, you can say this at home also, but if it's in shul, it should be done with a minyan. So the Chazan should pace himself that the people should be able to be with him at all the stations. That's more critical. really more critical, or even Shmoneh Esrei. So you want to make sure that most of the people in shul are with you, and the Chazan can say Kedusha in the Chazarat HaShatz. So you can't have a situation where there's 150 people in shul, 10 people finished Shmoneh Esrei, and the Chazan starts Chazarat HaShatz, and he doesn't have a minyan for Kedusha. That's not right. So in these cases, if you feel that whether it's in the Ezrat Nashim or in the men, there are people lagging behind severely, so the Gabayim should be brought to their attention, and they should discuss it, and so on. Of course, in some cases, the Gabbai is going to say, daven somewhere else. But that's not a solution, in my opinion. But I do have sometimes... Right. I do have... Look, in the weekday minyan, there's some legitimacy of davening a little faster, because people are in a rush. They're fine. They're in a rush, and thank God they're coming to shul in the morning. But what I do... I'm the first in Ol Nechama. I have the keys to the shul, and I open the doors and open the lights, and I'm there 15, 20 minutes before davening starts. You put on Tal Tefillin like a mensch, and you start saying Psukkah Zimra. Usually by the time I get to Yishtabach, the Chazan's up to Yishtabach. So, and I've instructed the Balei Tefillah after Baruch Hu to cool it, to take it, moderately. But Psukkah Zimra, they rush through Psukkah Zimra. So if they're going to rush through Psukkah Zimra, so you might as well get a jump start and daven ahead, because there's no concept of chazan for Psukkah Zimra. That's why a 5-year-old can be the quote-unquote chazan for Psukkah Zimra. He's just a pace setter. And by the Sfaradim, there is no chazan for Psukkah Zimra. Everybody's sitting down, and one gentleman is saying it out loud, word for word, the entire Psukkah Zimra. And that goes back to the days where people didn't have Siddurim, so there was a need for somebody to say it out loud, and everybody just follows along, and he keeps pace. That's all it is. And the Chazan starts with Kaddish after Yishtabach. That's the way the Rambam says, because that's when Tefillah B'tzibur starts. When the first Kaddish after Yishtabach, that's Tefillah B'tzibur. So if there's a problem of getting, because of slowly saying Psukkah Zimra, which is a proper thing to do, all you do is come a little early. That's all. But with regard to the other times, then you can just bring to the Gabbai's attention, or the Va'ad, the board of the shul, so they should talk about it. Yeah.
The Persian, the Rav, there's somebody in the Persian shul that says that I davened at. They say the whole thing out loud.
That's the Sephardi custom. That's the Sephardi custom. Ashkenazim don't do that. Yeah.
Number one, you're talking about Kriyat Shema.
Correct.
It comes from the Torah, so you're understandable that it can't have any changes.
We're talking about, but the subject is the brachot. The subject that the Rambam makes this comment is the brachot before and after Shema. And by the way, you already stumbled on one of the answers that some people give to this pseudo-contradiction between source 1 and source 2. And they say, when it comes to the phrase that ends a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzer HaMeorot, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMa'ariv HaRavim, by Ma'ariv, Baruch Atah Hashem HaBocher B'Amo Yisrael B'Yava. When it comes to the ending, that's where the Rambam was a stickler. It has to be precise. When the Rambam talks about source number 2, he's talking about the body of the bracha. So there he lets go a little bit, and he says, well, it can be in any language, and it can be in every form, as long as it conforms to the theme of the bracha, and so on. So that's one of the solutions to this. The Vilna Gaon didn't like that solution. He knew it. He just said, no, Rambam changed his mind. Finished. And, whenever somebody said the Rambam changed his mind, I'm in business. Then I was happy. Fine, Rambam changed his mind. Okay, but it was the galut that caused the dispersions of Jewish people throughout the world after the Bar Kokhba revolution, and the breakdown of central halachic authority with the abandonment of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin no longer could function in the way it functioned, and that was to be a final word in the oral law in Torah Sheba'al Peh. Which means when the let's say Bayit Sheni, second Beit Mikdash era, the Sanhedrin functioned. So there was no such thing as different nusach. You know where a different nusach may have developed? On Babylonian soil, because they didn't have the communication with Eretz Yisrael, but occasionally greats from Eretz Yisrael came down to Bavel and told them what the decisions of the Beit Din HaGadol were, and then sometimes they adjusted it. And sometimes they didn't adjust. Sometimes there were minhagim that developed independently in Bavel, and became part of our ritual. For example, Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. There's no such animal as Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. Hallel was instituted for 18 specific days, and they are the 8 days of Sukkot, the 8 days of Hanukkah, that's already 16, first day of Pesach, and 1 day of Shavuot. 18. In Chutz La'aretz, add 3 for the Yom Tov Sheni 3 times around, 21 days. That's the mitzvah of Hallel, where you have the exact text of Hallel from Tehillim, Kuf Yud Gimel, Kuf Yud Dalet, Kuf Tet Vav, Kuf Tet Zayin, Kuf Yud Zayin. That's Hallel, Kuf Yud Chet. That is Hallel. Fine. And we make a bracha for Hallel. Rav, who was the great Amora in Bavel, hails from Eretz Yisrael, studies by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, descends to Bavel, and he's a known persona already, and he comes to Shul on Rosh Chodesh, and he went ballistic. They're saying Hallel. What do you mean Hallel? Who says Hallel in Rosh Chodesh? There was no such animal in Eretz Yisrael saying Hallel in Rosh Chodesh. But then when he saw that they skipped a chapter, or half a chapter here, and skipped a half a chapter there, he cooled down, he calmed down. Okay, it's only a minhag. It's only a minhag. Minhag. So, what is Hallel? It's Tehillim. It's Tehillim. So, so some of you know that I have a fascination of flying. So for my 70th birthday, my kids bought me a flight lesson. Yeah. So I flew for an hour with an instructor, but I did the whole thing. Fine. So my wife said, you let me know when you land. Don't let me know before. And then she said, that day happened to have been Rosh Chodesh. It happened in Rosh Chodesh. She said, all of OUisrael was saying Tillim for you. It worked.
I have a bus driver was on 13 bus.
Yeah.
Every time we had a red light, this is now.
Yeah.
He opened his tiller, but he said tiller. Jay said that usually the passengers say.
Right. Right, okay. They said you're saying Tillim? That's good. As long as he did it by the red light. Yeah, if he didn't do it at the red light, I'd be a little bit worried. Right. They say a story of two people in shul. One davened, very well in shul with a lot of kavanah and everything, and after 120 years, he goes up and he sees that there's a taxi driver that's going into Gan Eden before him, and not even a religious taxi driver. So he asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why is this not fair? He says, this taxi driver generated more Tillim than anybody else. He said, sometimes it's not even funny. So the Rav, the Amora Rav, sees in Bavel that they're saying Hallel, but then notices that they're abbreviating the Hallel, and he calmed down. He said, okay, it's only a minhag. So this minhag caught on. Then became the big issue. Do you say a bracha on Hallel, on Rosh Chodesh, which is only a minhag? So the Rambam says, for sure no bracha. It's only a minhag. We don't make a bracha on a minhag. We make a bracha even on a rabbinic mitzvah. So the Rambam says Hallel on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot and Hanukkah is a rabbinic institution. But on rabbinic mitzvot we say a bracha. Like on Hanukkah and Purim we say a bracha on the mitzvot. Fine, that's not a problem, the bracha. But if it's a minhag, so there's no bracha on Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. But Rabbeinu Tam, who's Rashi's grandson, said that we do make the bracha on Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, and that became Ashkenazi minhag. Until this very day, you go to a Sephardi shul and on Rosh Chodesh, and there's no bracha before Hallel, in accordance with the Rambam's opinion. And the Rambam against Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, that filters down to Shulchan Aruch between Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah. Becomes a classic machloket in Shulchan Aruch of the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim, which is okay. And Rav Avad Yosef, who's a thoroughbred Sephardi, who's fighting to restore Sephardi minhag, and he actually believed that all of us here in Eretz Yisrael, no matter where we came from, become Sephardim automatically by coming on Aliyah, because Rabbi Yosef Karo was the Mara Da'atra, was the Rava Makom. When was Rabbi Yosef Karo the Mara Da'atra? 400 years, in the 16th century. So none of the poskim agreed with him on this. But he said that if you prefer to keep Minhag Ashkenaz, you have upon whom to rely on. Yesh al mi lismoch. That's very nice. But he also said that if an Ashkenazi is going to worry that he said the bracha and Hallel every Rosh Chodesh, that after 120 years God's going to accuse him of uttering a bracha in vain, a bracha levatala, Ashkenazim can calm down, because there's a principle in halacha. Kol makom shem yesh minhag ein chosheshim lebracha levatala. If you're covered by a minhag, that you do say a bracha for something, so you're not going to be held accountable for a bracha in vain. Whew. I was worried. Yeah.
Chatzi Hallel on Pesach.
Right.
The first day. Was that originally that way, or was
No, that's also a minhag. So Chatzi Hallel when we say Chatzi, if we know it's not 50%, abbreviated Hallel is Hallel b'dilug from the second day of Pesach on. Rambam says no bracha. Same thing. Only time there's a bracha is when it's complete Hallel. And by the way, the Rambam's bracha was V'tzivanu ligmor et Hallel. Ligmor, to complete Hallel. And that's a modern idiomatic expression, Gomrim et Hallel. When you say all prayer, I want to shower you with all praises, we say Gomrim alav et Hallel. That's a phrase. But the halachic background of that is ligmor et Hallel, which is the nusach of the bracha of the Rambam. And Ashkenazim have likro et Hallel. Fine. Yeah, Jay, the other day. It could be. I'm not familiar. Okay? Lamad l'shoncha lomar eini yodea. Teach yourself if you don't know, you don't know. I have Chabadnikim across the street. B'mikra, I'm going to be there. I'm never in the Beit Chabad in Katamon. I'm going to Bar Night for an Askara. So if I see a Chabadnik there, I will try to remember to ask him what the minhag is. That would have to do with the first Rebbe, Rav Shnei Zalman of Liadi, who wrote his own Shulchan Aruch. It's called Shulchan Aruch Harav. And it could be that he adopted the Rambam's position on this. It could be. Okay, I have to check. But generally, Ashkenazim do say Hallel on the bracha. Beseda. Last week, we also dealt with issues of... So what I mentioned, the business of Galut, let me get back to this, that this caused differences of nusach. Because we were far away, we did not have central halachic authority, things develop in terms of change of nusach, sometimes deliberately and sometimes inadvertently, by copying. You have to realize you didn't have printing press, everything was handwritten. And some say that the way movement, we call in Yiddish shuckling by davening, was a result of one person had a written SIDDUR and 6 people around him would share the SIDDUR, so everybody would move and take a peek and move back and let the next person move and take a peek. And that's how this developed as a custom of shaking during davening. Simply as something like that. And it's very likely there was some truth to this. So you had people davening by heart. You had people who didn't daven at all. They just listened to the Chazar Sashatz, the Chazan davening. And if you were someone who did not know how to daven Shmon Esrei, and you wanted the Shlich Tzibur to be motzi you, so you had to stand with 2 feet together, listen to every single word. Like Kiddush, Friday night, you listen to every single word, because the person's making Kiddush on your behalf. And it's not just the answering Amen at the end, which, by the way, if you're listening to every single word, you actually don't even have to answer Amen, because you listen to every single word. But we answer Amen because most of us don't always listen to every single word. You blank out somehow in the middle. So if you say Amen, it's like ditto. It's like I said it. It's as if you said it, and that's why we fulfill our obligation for Kiddush Friday night by having one person saying Kiddush. But Chazar Sashatz today, everybody davens Chazar Sashatz. But the poskim point out that on Yom Neroim, that even though we have machzorim, there are plenty of people in the world who come to shul who don't know how to daven. So the chazan actually has to have kavanah that he wants to be mitzi people. During on a Monday morning shachros or mincha, you don't have to bother, because anybody coming to shul usually knows how to daven. So, but we still go through the motions of a Shliach Tzibur and a Chazar Sashatz and so on. But on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it becomes more acute, his position, why he's there, and so on. Beseda. So you have differences of nusach that have developed, and it's not just nusach Ashkenaz, nusach Sfard. There's nusach Ari and nusach Teiman and nusach. There are a whole plethora of different nuschaot of Yadut Bavli and North Africa and so on. Said that sometimes the differences are minori, just a slight change of a word here and there, and sometimes it's even major. Fine. So today it's kibbutz galuyot time. Everybody's coming back to Eretz Yisrael. So what's the nusach of Eretz Yisrael? So we don't have yet a nusach Eretz Yisrael for most things. There are a handful of things that we have congealed, but what's happening is that under the chuppah, there's, and I say this in a positive sense, inter-ethnic marriages. The majority of the weddings in Eretz Yisrael today are inter-ethnic, except for one grouping. There's one grouping, it's the Haredi Ashkenazi grouping. It's the only grouping that does not view favorably ethnic marriages. But it's only a question of time that they'll come around, because most of the grandchildren already have some other ethnic identities in their blood, and eventually, even without Sanhedrin, Am Yisrael is going to come around with one type of a nusach here in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure it's going to happen. It may take another 50 to 100 years. Or it'll happen with the emergence of the Sanhedrin, and then there are going to be decisions taken on each nusach, whatever the nusach is going to be. So this is important. And I mentioned the fact that not only are the words important, but where you put the punctuation sometimes makes a big difference. So on the page that I handed out, not now, but I'm just going to go through this very, very quickly to give you some examples where we say in Et Shem, Hakel HaMelech HaGadol Gibor V'Norah in Birkat HaShachar in the morning, before Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. V'chulam mekablim aleihem ol malchut shamayim. We're talking about the malachim now. Right? V'chulam mekablim aleihem ol malchut shamayim zeh mizeh, v'notnim reshut zeh lazeh. Some people say in Nusach Sfard, notnim be'avar reshut zeh lazeh, lakdish liyotzram benachat ruach, besafa v'ura uv'ni'ima, kama, Kiddusha kulam ke'echad onim ve'omrim be'yirah. They all say Kiddusha together, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Now the allowance or the license for us to say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh is that the Malachim said it. How do we know that they said it? Because Yeshayahu got a peek. In Perek Vav, in Sefer Yeshayahu, in the Maseh Merkava, he sees the Malachim saying Shira to Kadosh Baruch Hu, V'kara ze'el zeh ve'amar, and they say to each other, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvaot Melech Haaretz Kvodo. And that's what Yeshayahu saw. What Yecheskel saw and heard was Baruch Kvod Hashem Mimkomo. Those are the two expressions of Shira of the Malachim. And we say in Kedusha, right? We say Nikadesh et Shimcha Ba'olam. How are we going to express words of Kedusha? Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom. The way they did it up there. Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom. How do we know this? Kakatuv al yad neviecha. It's a pasuk in Yeshayahu. The Nevi'im brought it to us. Kakatuv al yad neviecha. The two Nevi'im who we're going to call upon is Yeshayahu and Yecheskel. V'kara zel zeh v'amar. They said to each other, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvaot Melech Haaretz Kvodo. Right? Ve'ofanim, v'chayot HaKodesh, be'rash gadol. This is all expressions from the Ma'aseh Merkava, the scene of the chariot that Yecheskel sees. Lumatam mishabchim ve'omrim baruch kvod Hashem. So we are simply repeating the language of Kedusha. So we say it before Shema. We say v'chulam mikablim aleihem ol malchut shamayim. They accept upon themselves the yoke of heaven. They are with it. And lakdish liyotzram benachat ruach b'safa berura u'v'ni'ima. In very clear and melodious language. Kedusha kulam ke'echad, they all say the Kedusha. So Kedusha is a noun. It means the text of Kedusha. Whereas others say the following. Lakdish liyotzram benachat ruach, b'safa v'rura, u'v'ni'ima kedosha. It's an adjective. Ni'ima kedosha, with holy melody. Holy melody. comma. Kulam ke'echad omrim. All of them say it together. So what is it? Is it kedusha as a noun, where the comma comes before? Lakdish liotzra benachat ruach b'safar v'ura uv'ni'ima, comma, kedusha kulam ke'echad. Or is it lakdish liotzra benachat ruach b'safar v'ura uv'ni'ima kedosha, comma, kulam ke'echad? Well, depends which siddur you open up. Nusach Ashkenaz has the comma before, and the kedusha is a noun. Kedusha kulam ke'echad. And Nusach Eidot HaMizrach, and some people who daven Nusach Sfard have moved the comma, and the word kedusha now becomes an adjective, kedosha, uvene'ima kedosha, comma. So again, you're going to see this in a siddur, and it's not that the printer made a mistake. There are two different traditions as to how to say this. What bothers me is I know people who say v'ni'ima kedosha and say you are wrong by saying kedusha kulam kechad. No, we're not wrong. We have a tradition. Rashi, in his commentary to Yeshayahu Perek Vav, says kedusha kulam ke'echad. Notice he lifts the nusach of kedusha out of context and he puts it in his Perush. And I also found one of the Geonim saying also ubikedusha kulam ke'echad. So that nusach is correct, and that nusach is also correct. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. And you say what you say. Either we say what your grandfather said, or you just pick and choose. But or if the shul has one nusach, so go in line with the nusach. But you have the movement of the comma makes a big difference how we say this. Or, for example, when there are no kohanim duchening, so they instituted, the Shliach Tzibur says, Elokeinu Elokei Barcheinu bar bracha hamshuleshet, comma, batorah haktuva yedei Moshe Avdecha? Or is it, Elokeinu Elokei Barcheinu bar bracha hamshuleshet batorah, comma? Which is it? Is it bracha mishuleshet, comma, or is it mishuleshet batorah? Well, it's a bracha mishuleshet. It's a three-pronged bracha. Yivarech Hashem, Yer Hashem, Yisa Hashem. So it should be Barcheinu bar bracha mishuleshet, comma. Where is this bracha found? BaTorah haktuva yedei Moshe Avdecha. It's found in the Torah. Or is it a bracha that finds itself three times in the Chumash? Barcheinu bar bracha hamshuleshet baTorah. Now, is it three times in the Chumash? It's only once in the Chumash, right? It's in Parshat Naso. 1 second. There's also a Birkat Kohanim in Parshat Shmini, where the text is not there, but it says that Ahron raised his hands and gave a bracha, and Rashi says this was the text of the Birkat Kohanim. So you have at least a second mentioning, implicit, and then there are midrashim that suggest a third reference. In other words, when the world of medrash, you can squeeze out Birkat Kohanim three times in the Chumash. So you have this nusach, hamshuleshet baTorah. It's three times found in the Chumash. Or the bracha is mishuleshet, but it's only found once. Where? BaTorah ktuva yedei Moshe Avdecha. This has to do with the comma. Where do you put the comma makes a difference. But maybe the one that really can blow us away is Yehesh Mei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Al Me'al Maya. We all respond to Yehesh Mei Rabbah in Kaddish. How do you say it? Do you say Yehesh Mei Rabbah Mevarach, comma, Le'olam Al Me'al Maya? Or do you say Yehesh Mei Rabbah, comma, Mivarach le'alam u'lomei maya? You look at Siddurim, you're going to see both. Or none. None. Or some Siddurim printers decided not to stick their head in machloket, they put commas in both places. That makes it even easier, right? So this is discussed in a Tosfot in the beginning of Masechet Brachot, whether you should say it this way or that way. The Balei Tosfot favored the Yehesh Mei Rabbah Mivarach, comma, le'alam u'me'al maya. And Tosfot there gives two explanations, what it can mean this way, it can mean that way. I'm just pointing out as another example where a comma positioned after one word means one thing, and if it's positioned two words down the road, it means something else. The whole thing should mean something else. So this we have to be careful about. Let's look at our page and see what we have here. In source number 3, this is from the Laws of Tefillah, L'chot Tefillah Perek Zayin. The subject is Birkat HaTorah. Now we say Birkat HaTorah in the morning as a part of the brachot of the morning. You open up a siddur, before you even get started with Sukkot Zimra, you have Birkot HaShachar. I would even advise people, Birkot HaShachar, let's assume before davening, you want to nibble something because you're just very hungry. So, the Gemara tells us that we should daven before we eat. Okay, acceptable. Daven before you eat, there's a reference, it's not biblical, don't get me wrong here, but there's a reference that the Gemara says on the Pasuk in Parshat Kedoshim, Al tochlu al adam. What does it mean, Lo tochlu al adam? Don't eat on blood. What does that mean? It's explained in different ways. So one way the Gemara says, Al tochlu lifnei shetitpalalim al dimchem. Don't eat before you pray for your blood, for your health, that is to say. Fine. The Rambam comes along and tells us, if you're hungry, then you have a halacha of a sick person, and then you can eat. So a sick person doesn't have to worry about this halacha. And the Rambam says, you don't have to be deathly ill. If you're hungry, that's good enough. Because Rambam realized that if you're going to go into daven, with a lot of hunger pangs and starving, you're not going to daven right anyway. You're going to daven too quickly. It goes too quickly. You're going to daven much too quickly. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So you might as well eat something. What you should do is have a full-blown breakfast. That for sure not. But the idea of, so the poskim started getting into this business of, how much are you allowed to eat before? So some say, to drink, that's okay. Water, fine. Tea, fine. With sugar, without sugar, all kinds of discussions. All the poskim start, jumping on the bandwagon and so on. The only thing is that if you really feel that, especially on Shabbos morning, you're going to go to shul at 9 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning, and you're going to come back at 11:30 and you didn't eat anything, that's a problem of not fasting on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do that. So in any case, whether it's Shabbat or weekday, and I will stress that on Shabbat, there's no obligation to say Kiddush in the morning before you daven Shachris. Because people say, how can you eat before davening? It's before Kiddush. The obligation of Kiddush kicks in after Shachris, not after Musaf, after Shachris. So if for whatever reason the shul wants to have a break, like sometimes on Rosh Hashanah, before Tkiyot, there are many shuls that have a break before Tkiyos and Musaf, and people make Kiddush. So that's perfectly okay. And you don't even have to wait for Kriyat HaTorah, but usually that's what the shul would do. They would lane first and finish up with laning, and then go out for a break. But the idea of eating in the morning, having something on Shabbat or Yom Tov before davening, you don't have to worry about Kiddush because there's no obligation for Kiddush before you even daven Shachris. Fine, took care of that. But as long as you say Birkot HaShachar, Birkot HaShachar is something one should say before eating or drinking, whether it's a weekday, whether it's Shabbat, and then, you want to have a cup of coffee, you want to have a cup of tea, you want to... My mother used to say that the bracha on a cup of tea is bari in minei mezonot. You never sit down to a cup of tea without a piece of cake, right? So she always said the bracha of tea is bari minei mezonos. Fine. So that you want to something. It's not. As I always say, I've heard of bigger averos. So I remember once I was on one of the Poland trips, and we were sitting Shabbos morning in the hotel before going out to shul, and I always make sure that there's some drinks, hot drinks, and some cake to eat, and so on. And this gentleman comes over to me as I'm finishing up a piece of cake, and he says, "Isn't it true you're not allowed to eat before davening?" And it was, that was really. The timing was impeccable. I said, there's a Beferish Rambam that I can eat. Really? What does the Rambam say? Rambam says, if you're hungry, you have a din of a chayla. I'm hungry, so I'm eating. That's all. It's as simple as that. They accuse me. That was really something. But I always very careful to say Birkot HaShachar before. Because Birkot HaShachar is it's brachot, it's Birkat Shevach. It's not formal bakasha yet. It's not titpalalu al dimchem. But nevertheless, it's something. So one of the things that we say in Birkot HaShachar is Birkot HaTorah. Now, it factors into the SIDDUR, but it's an independent obligation. If you happen to wake up at 4 in the morning, before you can even say brachot, because it's not it hasn't, before break of dawn, but you want to study Torah. So the Rambam tells us here, Hamashkim, source number 3, Hamashkim likro b'Torah, kodem shikra kriyat shema. If you're going to study Torah, before you read Shema, and whether it's Torah shebichtav, you're studying Tanakh, you want to read Tillim, for that matter. Or Ben Korash Torah shebal you want to study Mishnayos, you want to study Gemara. So what do? Notel yadav tchila, you have to wash your hands, says the Rambam. Umavarech shalosh brachot. There are 3 brachot in Birkat Torah. Rambam is telling us you have to say Birkat Torah in the morning, even as before the time of davening. Because this allows you to study Torah. Fine. And there's nothing wrong. It's very commendable that a person is going to study Torah at 4 in the morning if he gets up at 4 in the morning. Fine. So you have to say Birkat Torah. I will just say that the Shulchan Aruch says categorically, using 4 words, Nashim Mivarchot Birkat HaTorah. It's equality across the board here. Why is that important? And who says it? It's Rav Yosef Karo, the Sephardi. Because Rav Yosef Karo, the Sephardi, echoes the Rambam's sentiment that when it comes to the time-bound mitzvot, like Shofar, Lulav, Sukkah, Sfirat HaOmer, any time-bound mitzvah that comes along with a bracha, so the Rambam said women who are allowed to voluntarily fulfill these mitzvot should do it without a bracha. Beseda. And that's how Rabbi Yosef Karo says it in Shulchan Aruch, and that's how Rav Avad Yosef waved the banner of Lachzir Atara Liyoshna, let's get the Sephardi minhag back on track, and women do not say a bracha. Why not? The Rav Soloveitchik explained, because the Rambam understood the word vitzivanu in the bracha, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav, vitzivanu, he who is obligated. If the obligation is not there, you don't make a bracha. Rabbeinu Tam argued with the Rambam on this, and said that a woman does make a bracha on mitzvot aseh shazman grama, on time-bound mitzvot, and that's why the Rama says it in Shulchan Aruch, and that's why Ashkenazi women do make the bracha. So 1 second. What do you do with the word vitzivanu? Well, he understood it differently, obviously. So there are 2 ways to understand how Rabbeinu Tam understood vitzivanu. So most people understand it, that Rabbeinu Tam understood the word vitzivanu, that it wasn't on the person doing the mitzvah right now, but it's on Klal Yisrael. I mean, why in the world is the woman going into the sukkah? Because there's a pasuk in Chumash, Pasukot Teshvu, Shevat Yamim. Why in the world is she listening to the shofar? Because there's a pasuk, Yom Teruah Yeh Lechem. That's why she's doing it. So Klal Yisrael was given the mitzvah, so she's part of Vitzivanu as part of Klal Yisrael. Irrespective of the fact that as a woman, she may not have been obligated to do this particular mitzvah, but this particular mitzvah is part of the Torah of Klal Yisrael. Fine. The Rav had a different take on this. He used a split that's classic from the Lamdanim of Brisk. The difference between a chiyuv and a kiyum, an obligation and a fulfillment. And he said that the chiyuv is one thing, the kiyum, the fulfillment, is something else. You can be in a scenario where you're not obligated, but you voluntarily do the mitzvah. So what is it? Just an act that has no value? Absolutely not. It's a fulfillment of a mitzvah 100%. And the object of the mitzvah has to be 100% kosher. Even the mahadran has to be good. And a woman who opts to fulfill a mitzvah taseh shazman grama, that she is exempt, is in 100% fulfillment of the mitzvah. It's not partial fulfillment, it's 100% fulfillment. And that's this split between chiyuv and kiyum, obligation and fulfillment, is the way the Briskers explained the dispute between the Rambam and the Ramban about living in Eretz Yisrael. Because the Ramban counts it as one of the 613 and says you have to pick yourself up and move. And he did it. I mean, it took him 4 years to get there because the flight from Barcelona to Tel Aviv didn't run that day in 1263. But he made it to Eretz Yisrael after 4 years. But the Rambam does not count it as part of the 613. Yet, the Rambam glorifies living in Eretz Yisrael. So what's going on here? So the Rav said that the Rambam believes that it's a fulfilled mitzvah. When you come in Aliyah, you are in fulfillment of the mitzvah of Yishuv Haaretz, even though it wasn't part of the list of the 613 that obligated you. So this split between Chiyuv and Kiyum exists in the lexicon of the Lamdanim of Brisk. And that's how the Rav understood the difference between Chiyuv and Kiyum for the word Vitzivanu. That according to Rabbeinu Tam, you can say Vitzivanu even if you are just in fulfillment of the mitzvah. That's good enough to say Vitzivanu. You don't have to be in the obligatory box. You can be in the Kiyum box, and that's going to be good enough. And that's the way Ashkenazi women do. They say Vitzivanu on all the mitzvot that they do, for sure. But that's the machloket, the dispute between Sfardim and Ashkenazim, Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Ramah. Fine. But Birkat Torah, there's no machloket. There's no dispute whatsoever. Even the Sfardim believe that there's an obligation for a woman to say Birkat Torah in the morning before she studies Torah. Why so? The answer is because the Birkat Torah has nothing to do with the obligation for Torah study. We're not getting into the whole discussion of differences between men and women and obligation of Torah study. That's not the issue here. The idea is that the Torah itself, the mere study of Torah, demands that words of shevach, of praise, are said before you start studying. And that's based on a pasuk, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havu Godel Lelokeinu. Just mentioning God's name, and God's name in a wide sense, not just specifically mentioning God's name, but everything about Torah Moshe is mentioning God's name. Anything, any pasuk, even what came out of Bilam's donkey's mouth. It's Torah, it's God's word. And therefore, Havu Godel Lelokeinu, we have to bring and offer words of Gedulah, of greatness and praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this has nothing to do with obligation or fulfillment. It's a completely different notion of why we say Birkat Torah, and hence women are obligated in Birkat Torah. And what's interesting, and again, when I'm going to say something, I'm not saying that I'm voting for this procedure, but in those very modern Orthodox settings that would like to offer a woman an aliyah l'Torah, and let's just say it's in the context of just women davening, okay? Just whatever it is. The problem is how if Chazal didn't establish Kriyat Torah except in the context of a minyan, and 10 women does not constitute a minyan, I'm not going to be terribly apologetic about it, how can you have Kriyat Torah? The answer is they tell the women who are going to get aliyot not to say the Birkat Torah in the morning until they're called up to the Torah, and then to say the bracha Asher Bacha Banu Mikol Amim, which is the bracha of Birkat Torah in the morning, so they get it done before then. So there's no bracha levatala. Okay, beseder. I'm just saying is that a lot of thought was given to this, but I'll really blow you away now. But you have to put your seatbelts on. I don't want anybody falling off their chair now. Please. The question of a minyan of 10 kohanim in shul. The whole minyan is 10 kohanim. That can happen. My father-in-law, Shalom, was a kohen, and he remembers that in Frankfurt, the family used to have a Sefer Torah and by his father, and they would have a family minyan for Mincha and Shabbos, which means they laned. How do you give out aliyahs if everybody's a kohen? Oh, so that's the easy one. So Feigi's a kohen, fine, married to a kohen. So is your family also a kohen? Not just a... No, okay, so you married up. Woohoo. My wife married down. See? So what do? So Feigi says, right, that's what most poskim say. If everybody's a kohen, why don't we give kohen Revi and Chamishi and Shishi on a Shabbat? Why? Because somebody's going to say, yeah, Rabbi Kahana said he's a kohen. I saw him get Chamishi. So really he's not a kohen. It's going to cause a rumor of the yichus, of the pedigree of the family. So don't give kahanas and kohen and Katz, that's Kohen Tzedek, and Katzman and Katzenstein and Katzenellenbogen and Kaplan, which became Chaplin, like in Charlie Chaplin. So not only was he a shaigus, but he was also a kohen, you know. Yeah. So all these kohanim names, right? And Azulai, if you're a Moroccan. Why is Azulai? Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. It's the abbreviation of Psulei Chitun for the Kohanim. Yeah, I learned this from Avshalom Kor, my great teacher in Hebrew. So you have all these names of Kohanim and so on. So everybody says if the whole shul of Kohanim, you don't have to worry about Gam Yichus, because everybody knows that they're all Kohanim, so you can give a Kohen Shlishi and Revi and Chamishi and so on. The only thing we do today, we give a Kohen Maftir, because Maftir is not even an Aliyah, and if it's Ahron, not Shvi, but if we give extras, we give a Sofot, so then you can give a Kohen Ahron. A lot of times they do this at a Bar Mitzvah of a family of Kohanim, so you want to get the grandfather here, and you want to get the brother, give him an Aliyah. So the only way to do it is to make an Ahron, and because the Bar Mitzvah boy himself is going to get Maftir, and so on. So he can do it. That's not a problem. But there's a tshuva from Maram Rutenberg. Who's Maram Rutenberg? He is the closer of the Balei HaTosfot. Germany, 14th century. Early 14th century, late 13th century. He dies al Kiddush Hashem in a pogrom. What happened was with Maram Rutenberg, actually, he was kidnapped. He was a hostage. And the church wanted ransom money from the community. And, they were willing to ransom him, but he paskin no, because it's going to bring about more kidnappings. So they didn't allow his body out for years, till eventually they let his body out for kfura. So Maram Rubik was a kadosh, was a martyr, for sure. And he was the last of the Baalei HaTosfot, the end of the period of the Tosfot, the most acclaimed posek of his generation. And it is important for you to understand this, because when you hear his psak, what do you do when you have a shul where they're all kohanim? He says, well, you give Kohen the first aliyah, and he gets the second aliyah, bimkom Levi. That's what we do when there's no Levi. And then for shlishi, ravi, chamishi, shishi, shvi, you call up women. Women? See? Good thing Fagi had a seatbelt on, because she was ready to fall off the chair. Right? Give women. Why do women not get aliyah? The Gemara says, Isha lo tikra meshum kvod hatzibur. Not tircha hatzibur, kvod hatzibur. That people are going to feel uncomfortable, and a woman are going to walk up. It might be, they might have all kinds of thoughts when she walks up, if she's a good-looking lady, and so on. It's kvod hatzibur. It's just, in Yiddish we say, spasnisht. It just doesn't fit. Okay. But Maram Rutmerg said, I would rather not budge on the gzeira, not to give Kayan shlishi vish chamishi shishi, even though here in this case it could work. Okay, you understood that. But I don't want to budge with this, because this is ironclad. I'd rather budge with giving a woman an aliyah. Now that became used, this tshuva, by the conservative movement in America. You see, Ram Rutenberg Paskin, the woman getting aliyah. Okay, beseda, but he said it in these circumstances. But Rav Moshe Feinstein also used this tshuva. For what purpose? There was a scenario once in a shul in America where there was a simcha, could be a bar mitzvah, oifruf, whatever it was, and guests come. So what happens when a woman comes to a shul, she doesn't know how to get into the Ezrat Nashim, she by accident falls into the men's section. It can happen, So what do? You politely tell the woman where the door for the Ezrat Nashim is. Then that's the end of the story. So this woman came in the middle of laning, like some women come a little late, and she came in the middle of laning. Okay, so somebody escorted her out. So every shul has a zealot, a kana'i, and this kana'i yells and he says that the Baal Kaira should repeat the psukim that were laned when the woman was there. And he made a whole thing about it. Like the biggest mitzvah in the world is to embarrass the woman publicly. That's like a very big mitzvah, And there was a whole Ra'ash Gadol in the shul, how to handle this. So Matzah Shabbos, somebody wrote to Rav Moshe Feinstein that he should give a ruling on this. So he said, oh yeah, of course it was a Chil Hashem. The question was that this man said that the moments that the woman was in the men's section, so there was the profaning of the kedusha of the Beit Knesset, and hence the laning of those 2-3 psukim that went on while this woman was standing there was invalidated and had to be reread. That's what the guy claimed. So Rabbi Moshe says, yeah, there was a Chil Hashem. That guy's outburst was a Chil Hashem. That's what he says. He calls it as it was, because, don't draft me into being on his side. And not only that, but I'm going to prove to you that there's no profaning of Kedushat Beit HaKnesset, even if, God forbid, an Aveira was done, a real Aveira. And he cites a tshuva from the Middle Ages where on Friday night, the shamus of the shul was having an affair with a married woman in the community in the shul. And then that story broke, and somebody claimed that the shul's sanctity was profaned, and the psak was it wasn't. So for sure, this was not a profaning of Shem Hashem. And then he goes further and he says, but the Maram Rutenberg said if the whole shul was just Kohanim, so then from Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi, you give women aliyahs. You see that a woman can be in shul during laning. That's his proof. So while Rav Moshe would never have said that halacha l'maisa, Rav Moshe, if somebody would have asked him, what do I do? The shul is just kahanim, he would have said what Fagi just said. So you give kahanim, Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi, and end the discussion. But he drafts the tshuva of Rav Marmon into service to prove that a woman getting an aliyah doesn't cause the profaning of the kedusha of Beit HaKnesset. So what are you doing with this guest who walked in for 2 seconds, You make a whole Ra'ash Gadol, and so on. So I'm just saying that tshuva of Maram Rutenberg was actually very important. So now you're going to say, how many people know of that tshuva of the Maram Rutenberg? So a lot of people don't know it from the tshuvas of the Maram Rutenberg, from the book, the Responsa literature. But he had a great fortune that he was quoted by his Talmud, who was the student of Maram Rutenberg, and he happened to have been his nephew as well, and he also died as a martyr in 1298. I'm talking about the author of the Hagaot Maimoniyot. If you look at source number 4, it says Hagaot Maimoniyot. Hagaot Maimoniyot was an Ashkenazi thoroughbred, again, nephew and student of Maram Rutenberg, who looks at the Rambam, Sephardi book, and he's going to tell us what we Ashkenazim do. Notice, to a certain degree, he does to the Rambam what Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, does to Rav Yosef Karo, the Sephardi Rav Yosef Karo Shulchan Aruch. What does Rav Yosef Karo do? He writes a Shulchan Aruch. It's a prepared table. What does the Ramah do? He puts the mapah. He calls it the tablecloth. I'm putting the Ashkenazi tablecloth on it, so it becomes Ashkenazi friendly. So the Ashkenazim can also use the book. Fine. So Shulchan Aruch today is a tennis match between Tzfat and Krakow. You're going back and forth, but the printer did us a favor by printing Rabbi Yosef Karo in bold letters and Ramah in Rashi print. So you know right away that you've moved from Tzfat, the Sephardi view, to Krakow, the Ashkenazi view. But Ramah is doing that for the Shulchan Aruch. But the Hagaot Maimoniyot, early on in life, in history, did the same thing for the Rambam. And he makes it Ashkenazi friendly. Look, the Rambam says that on Purim, you make a 3 brachot at night, okay, 3 brachot for the brachot for Megillah, and in the morning you don't have to say a Shechayanu again. But we Ashkenazim, says the Hagaot Maimoniyot, the name of his Rebbe, the Maram Rutenberg, we repeat the Shechayanu in the morning. So if an Ashkenazi is learning the Rambam, and you all of a sudden you take a second time, what do you mean? We don't do this. You take a peek down in the page to Hagaot Maimoniyot, more often than not, he's going to draw attention to the fact that the Ashkenazim do it somewhat differently. Fine. So here we're going to see an example of where you have a nusach of the bracha. So I'm just going to introduce it now. We're going to do it next week in Mitzvah Hashem. The bracha begins with Asher Kitshanu B'Sav Tzivanu Al La'asok B'Divrei Torah. That's what Ashkenazim say. Sephardim say Asher Kitshanu B'Sav Tzivanu Al Divrei Torah. Fine. On that difference, we'll talk about next week as well. And then comes the continuation. Does it continue Ha'arev Da Hashem Elokeinu Et Divrei Torah Chavifinu, or V'ha'arev Da Hashem Elokeinu? Is there a vav? Or is there no vav? Let's just look for a second at source number 3, where I'm reading. It says, on the second line, Umavarech shalosh brachot, v'achar kach korei. You made 3 brachot, and then you study. You read Torah, you study Torah, and here they are. Ve'elohen, asher kidshanu musav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, and then it says, v'ha'arevna. Right? That's what it says. You see it? I have it on the line. V'ha'arevna. Jump down to source number 4. The Hagaot Maimoniyot, HaTosafot Katvu, the Baalei HaTosafot says, Sheyesh likrot v'ha'arev bivav, with a vav. Now, if he's commenting and saying that by us it's with a vav, what was there in his text of the Rambam? It clearly without a vav. He was commenting that in the Rambam says, Ha'arev na Hashem Elokeinu. But I'm telling you, we Ashkenazim say, Ve'arev, da'akol bracha achat. It's continuation. What is a vav? It's a conjunction. It continues the previous bracha and the next bracha. So you have one long bracha, according to the Hagaot Maimoniyot and Baalei HaTosafot, that begins with Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu mecholam asher gisham v'sav tzivanu al divrei Torah, or v'lasok b'divrei Torah, ve'arev na Hashem Elokeinu until Baruch atah Hashem hamelamed Torah l'O'Israel. Ad kan Hakafar Rishona, first bracha. Second bracha, Asher Bachabanu Mikol Amim V'Natan Torato. Sachakol, 2 brachot. Rambam says there are 3 brachot. Why? First bracha ends with V'Tzivanu Al Divrei Torah. End of bracha. Now there's a new bracha. Harev Da Hashem Elokeinu Divrei Torah, and ends. And then comes the third bracha, Asher Bachabanu Mikol Amim. So the machloket is not just on a vav, but do we have 2 brachot or 3 brachot? That's the machloket. What's behind that machloket? But one thing is clear. The printers inadvertently printed Nusach Ashkenaz in the Rambam. And that's why I have it here. V'ha'arev in source number 3. The printers inadvertently printed Nusach Ashkenaz. How did that happen? Stay tuned next week. Now you're going to have to come next week because I'm going to leave you, in suspense. In suspense. But we've learned who the Maram Rutenberg was, who the Baal HaGaot Mameniot, the author of HaGaot Mameniot, who was his nephew. There was a pogrom in Rindfleisch, Germany in 1298. That's where he perished. And I know about it because two of my colleagues 2 years ago when I was in the fellowship in Harvard, they were experts in medieval Jewish history. One was a Goya, lovely girl, I'll mention her name, Sophia Schmidt, who knew the tshuvas of Maram Rutenberg by heart. I couldn't believe it. She knew the tshuvas of Maram Rutenberg by heart and knew the Or Zarua. I mean, these are difficult Rishonim. And I was sitting there embarrassed. So she told me, you know the Rambam by heart. I don't know the Rambam by heart. Oh no. So she told me about the Rindfleisch pogrom in 1298. Oh, thank you very much. It was his grandson who fell. It was his grandson. Thank you.
My son was behind me, so I may have to see together.
Right.
So they all have.
Elias, right, that's what's done.
Yeah, nobody
That's
else
what's
was
done.
there.
That's what's done. Okay. I'll collect the pages to make sure that everybody has the pages next week.